All right, ready to dive deep into some mind-bending stuff today.
Always up for a good mind bend.
Excellent. Today we're exploring 4E cognition.
Oh, interesting.
That's embodied, embedded, enacted, and extended. It's a pretty fascinating concept that challenges the traditional idea that thinking only happens in the brain.
Right. I've heard a bit about this.
Yeah, and we're going to use, let's see, 4E cognition, historical roots, key concepts, and central issues
Okay.
from the Oxford Handbook of 4E cognition
Hmm.
to guide our deep dive.
Sounds good.
So it really makes you question everything you thought about thinking, you know? Like, what if it's not all just happening in our heads?
Yeah, I mean, it is a pretty radical shift.
Hmm.
Thinking of our bodies, our environment, maybe even the tools we use as part of the whole cognitive process.
Right. Kind of blows your mind a little bit.
Totally.
So where does this whole 4E idea come from? Like, it's not like someone just pulled it out of thin air.
Well, the chapter actually traces the roots of 4E pretty far back to philosophers like Plato and Aristotle.
Oh, wow. Okay.
They were already, way back then, grappling with this whole relationship between the mind and the body.
Yeah, classic philosophical dilemma.
Right. But it really picked up steam in the 1990s with this idea of embodied cognition,
Okay.
influenced by thinkers like Varela, Thompson, and Hutchins, to name a few. They were really pushing the idea that you can't separate cognition from our physical experiences, our interactions with the world.
Hmm. So it's really a departure from that, like, classic brain in a vat kind of model of thinking.
Exactly. And Gibson's ecological psychology was a big influence, too. He really emphasized how our environment shapes our actions and perceptions.
That's right. Totally ties into the whole 4E perspective.
Right, exactly.
Okay, so let's get into some of the nitty-gritty here, the core concepts.
Okay.
The chapter mentions the this traditional model called the representational and computational model, or RCC.
Ah.
Can you break that down for us a little bit?
Yeah, basically the RCC sees the brain kind of like an information processor, manipulating these abstract symbols, crunching data, and that leads to thought.
Okay.
But 4E says, hold on a second. What about the role of our bodily experiences, the environment, the interactions? It's all got to be part of the equation.
So it's really about how we're not just these brains in jars,
Yeah.
right? We're out there in the world interacting and experiencing things, and that shapes how we think.
Exactly. That's a great way to put it.
Okay, so the chapter also delves into these different types of embodiment, like strong and weak. And I got to say, it gets kind of complex.
Yeah, it can be a bit tricky.
Could you unpack that a little for us?
Sure. So you've got these 4 claims about embodiment. Strong, weak, bodily processes, extra bodily processes.
Right.
And it all boils down to how deeply integrated you think those elements are in the cognitive process itself.
Okay.
So weak embodiment is like those elements have an influence, they play a part.
Yeah.
But strong embodiment says, no, they're actually part of cognition itself.
Can you give us an example, something to make that a little more concrete?
Sure. Imagine you're writing a note to yourself, right?
Okay.
So you're using a pen and paper, extra bodily processes.
Right.
So someone arguing for weak embodiment would say, yeah, sure, the pen and paper are helpful. They're tools.
Okay.
But the thinking is still happening in your brain. But a strong embodiment person would say, no, no, no. The act of writing, how the pen feels, the way the words look on the paper, that's all part of the cognitive process of remembering.
Oh, okay. That makes it a lot clearer.
Good, good.
So then embedded cognition and extended cognition kind of fit into that strong embodiment idea, right?
Yep.
Where things outside the brain become part of how we think.
Exactly. They're not just tools. They're part of the process itself.
Okay. And then there's enacted cognition. That one focuses on how action shapes the way we think, right?
Yes. The idea being we don't just passively perceive the world, we actively engage with it. And that engagement directly impacts our thinking.
So, like, my experience of being in this room isn't just about what I see, right? It's about how I move around, what I interact with, all of that.
Exactly. Like, the chapter uses Noe's theory of perception to kind of illustrate this. Perception isn't just about receiving information. It's about actively doing something through our movements and how we interact.
So we're not just sponges soaking up information. We're actively creating our understanding of the world through our actions.
You got it.
That's pretty wild.
Yeah.
So we've got all these different concepts within 4E. Embodied, embedded, extended, enacted. Seems like there's got to be a lot of debate about what exactly we even mean by cognition and where the lines are.
Oh, absolutely. And one of the big ones is this whole question of constitution versus causal dependency. Are these external elements part of our cognitive system, or do they just influence it?
It seems like a subtle distinction, but I guess it could have some pretty big implications.
Oh, definitely. Like the chapter uses the example of solving a math problem. Think about all the things that could be involved. Your brain processes, eye movements, posture, maybe you're using a calculator, even your stress levels could play a role.
Right. And are all of those part of the system that's actually solving the problem? Or are some of them just kind of influencing it from the sidelines?
Yeah, it gets pretty tricky to untangle. It's like trying to figure out which ingredients in a recipe are absolutely essential and which ones just add a little extra flavor.
I like that analogy.
And the chapter calls out something called the coupling constitution fallacy.
Hmm.
Just because something happens alongside cognition doesn't automatically mean it's a part of it.
So just because a tool helps me think doesn't mean it's literally part of my mind.
Right, exactly. And figuring out what actually constitutes cognition it can get really philosophical really fast.
I bet. But for now, we've definitely covered a lot of ground. We've gone through a bit of the history of 4E, touched on the main concepts, and even started to grapple with the question of what actually makes up cognition.
Welcome back. You ready to keep going with 4E cognition?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Last time we laid some groundwork and talked about how 4E challenges those classic brain-centered ideas of thinking. But I'm curious about what 4E says about mental representations. Like those mental images and symbols and concepts we usually think of as like the basic units of thought.
Yeah, that's a great question. And it turns out there are a lot of different views on mental representations within 4E.
Oh, really?
Yeah, like some proponents like Kemmerow, they're all about this radical embodiment view where we can just ditch representations altogether.
Wait, so no more internal symbols bouncing around in our heads.
That's the idea, at least for the radical embodied cognition folks.
Hmm.
But the chapter also talks about other perspectives like Wilson's wide computationalism and Clark's extended functionalism.
Okay.
And those suggest that representations might still be useful,
Okay.
but they're not limited to just the brain.
Interesting.
They can spread out and include elements of the body and the environment.
So instead of being trapped inside our heads, representations can actually extend outward into the world around us.
Yeah, that's right. It's like they're incorporating our tools, our surroundings, even our interactions with other people.
That's pretty mind-blowing. So it's not just that the environment influences our thoughts, but it can actually become part of the thought itself.
Exactly. And this goes back to that point the chapter makes about the diversity within 4E.
Right. There isn't just one single 4E theory. There's a whole bunch of perspectives that all share this core idea of cognition being shaped by our embodiment and interactions.
Exactly. It's a really dynamic and evolving field, lots of room for different interpretations and approaches.
I'm starting to see how complex this whole thing is. But let's step back for a second. Why should all this even matter to someone who's not, like, a cognitive scientist or philosopher?
Right, good question. What are the real-world implications of this way of thinking?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, the chapter offers some pretty cool insights. For one, 4E challenges us to really rethink what cognition even is. We can't just focus on the brain anymore.
So it's not just about where it happens, but how it happens. The whole process across the boundaries of mind, body, and environment.
Right. And this has some big practical implications for research, for how we design experiments and build models, and even understand and treat things like mental health issues.
Okay, I was hoping we could get into that. What are some specific examples of how 4E is being applied?
Sure. Well, let's start with psychopathology. Instead of just focusing on what might be wrong in the brain, 4E encourages us to look at how someone's body, their environment, and their social interactions might all contribute to their mental health. Like, take anxiety, for example.
Okay.
4E might help us understand how that constant feedback loop between anxiety and avoiding certain things actually shapes the neural pathways involved.
So it's not just about faulty wiring in the brain, but how the body and environment interact to reinforce those patterns.
Exactly. It's about creating the whole system, not just the brain. And we're seeing this shift in other areas too, like how we think about animal cognition. We're moving away from ranking animals on a hierarchy with humans at the top.
That old idea that humans are the most intelligent species and everything else is just below us.
Right. And instead, 4E suggests we appreciate all those different types of intelligence out there, all those different ways of thinking that have evolved to fit different bodies and environments.
So we're recognizing that intelligence comes in many forms, all equally fascinating and complex. I like that.
Yeah, and that appreciation for embodied intelligence is inspiring new approaches to robot design, too. Instead of trying to create robots that think exactly like us, researchers are looking at how animals solve problems in their own embodied ways.
So instead of building robots with human-like brains, We're turning to nature for inspiration
Hmm.
for how to create intelligent systems that are adapted to different tasks and environments.
Exactly. And it doesn't stop there. The chapter even talks about how 4E is being applied to fields like social psychology and aesthetics and literary theory.
Wow, so 4E is really having a pretty broad impact. It's not just about cognition anymore, it's a whole new way of seeing the world. But with all this talk about embodiment and environment, it makes me wonder about the role of technology.
Oh, yeah, good point.
We're spending more and more time in these digital spaces, interacting with the world through screens. How does that fit into the 4E picture?
That is an excellent propulsion, and it's one the chapter touches on when it talks about the implications of 4E for social cognition and language.
Okay.
Technology, especially digital technology, is definitely reshaping how we interact with the world and each other. But whether it's extending our minds or fundamentally changing them, that's still up for debate.
So last time, we were talking about some of those implications of 4E cognition, how it's changing the way we think about thinking itself.
It really is a game changer.
We were getting into how it's influencing, how we understand mental health,
Right.
animal cognition,
Yeah.
even robot design. Seems like 4E is pushing boundaries in some pretty unexpected directions.
Absolutely. The chapter actually highlights a whole bunch of practical applications that we haven't even touched on yet.
Oh, really?
Yeah, like 4E insights are being used to design better learning environments.
Hmm.
And even to develop new therapies for conditions like autism and ADHD.
Oh, wow. So instead of seeing these conditions as just neurological deficits, we're understanding how they could involve differences in how someone interacts with the world.
Exactly. And when we take that broader view, we can come up with interventions that target the whole system, not just the brain. Another area where 4E is really making waves is in social cognition.
So that's how we understand other minds, how we navigate those tricky social interactions.
Yeah, exactly. 4E is challenging some of those traditional theory of mind approaches that focus mainly on mental states.
Hmm.
Instead, it emphasizes the role of our interactions. How we pick up on cues, respond to movements, share emotions, even just coordinate actions with others.
So it's not just about thinking about other people's minds, but actually being with them in that shared embodied experience.
Yes, perfectly put. And that leads to another fascinating piece of this whole 4E puzzle language.
We did touch on that a bit last time.
I did.
But I'm still a little fuzzy on how language fits into this whole embodied cognition picture.
Okay, well, think about it this way. Traditionally, we've thought of language as this, abstract system of symbols we manipulate in our heads.
Okay.
But 4E suggests that language might be way more rooted in our bodies and our actions than we realize.
Really?
Yeah. Think about how much we use gestures, facial expressions, posture when we communicate. And so much of language is about describing actions, conveying our experiences. It's almost like language is a bridge between those basic embodied actions and our more complex thoughts and those social interactions.
So language isn't just about representing the world, it's about participating in it, shaping our experiences,
Yeah.
creating meaning with others.
Exactly. And this leads us to a really intriguing point about cognitive evolution. Instead of seeing human cognition as this peak of intelligence, 4E suggests a more continuous view, emphasizing those shared foundations of cognition across species.
So we're not just focused on how special human brains are, but we're looking at how cognition has evolved in all these different ways, shaped by different bodies and environments.
Yes, and that leads to this amazing idea of coevolution, how our brains, bodies, tools, language, and cultural practices have all shaped each other over time.
It's like this intricate dance of adaptation and innovation, where minds and bodies are evolving together, responding to each other and to the world around us.
That's a beautiful way to put it. And it has some really deep implications for how we understand ourselves and our place in the world. It challenges that old view of humans as separate from nature, superior to it. Instead, we start seeing ourselves as deeply embedded in the natural world, our minds and bodies shaped by the same forces that have shaped every living thing.
It's a very humbling thought, but also very exciting. It makes you realize just how much we still have to learn about the mind, about the world, and about ourselves.
Absolutely. And what's so cool about 4E is it's not just theoretical, it's a real catalyst for new discoveries.
Yeah.
And it's inspiring all these innovative solutions to some really tough real-world problems. It's changing how we approach education, healthcare, artificial intelligence, even environmental sustainability.
It sounds like 4E is more than just a theory, it's a call to action. It's about reimagining how we relate to ourselves, each other, and the world.
Beautifully said. embracing that interconnectedness of mind, body, and environment, recognizing how powerful this perspective can be in transforming how we live and learn and create.
Well, deep divers, we've gone pretty deep into 4E cognition today, from those ancient philosophical roots to the cutting-edge applications.
Quite a journey.
We've seen how this whole paradigm-shifting idea is truly reshaping our very understanding of thinking. And the key takeaway, maybe we're thinking with more than just our brains. Our bodies, our environment, our tools, our relationships, they all play a part in this incredible dance of cognition. So, as you go about your day, pay attention to how your body feels, how your surroundings affect your thoughts, how your interactions shape your experiences. You're not just a brain and a body. You're an embodied, embedded, enacted, and extended being, constantly shaping and being shaped by the world around you.
And remember, this is just the start of the exploration. There's so much more to discover about the embodied mind. Keep asking questions, keep diving deep.